I want to read in the beginning here from this book I mentioned last week in the message, just working my way through it. It's called Unchristian, and whoops, that's for you, Dave, but we'll get it to you later. So mentioned it last week, and I guess I'll just say the Joshua Harris story, I know it's somewhat old news now, but it keeps, more and more blog posts keep emerging, so it's like still a talking point out there in the larger church world. So how many of you in here know of Josh Harris, or have read a book, have heard him preach, something? Okay, small, I don't know, small percentage, probably less than half. So of that group, if you know of him, know anything of him, his ministry, how many of you would say you were not at all impacted by the story, just didn't do anything, just kind of like, oh, whatever? How many were in that category? Just, there was nothing really, no response. Just, no. Okay. How many of you said, man, cared a little bit, maybe impacted you, made you think about your faith a little bit? Any of you in sort of that, yeah, kind of a little bit? Okay. And others of you, technically, if we did this right, it should be the remaining ones of you who would raise your hand and say, yeah, it impacted me a lot, and I thought about it a lot. But that would be probably presumptuous on my part to think that mathematically would work out right, so I'm not going to try that. But the other option would be that you did think about it a lot, and for me, I did. I thought about it a lot, having read several books of his. And then this past week, another article came out that mentioned not only his fall, but then talked about an organization some of you have heard of called the Gospel Coalition. Their website has tons of resources. It's a huge network. Pastors all over the country, probably all over the world, are part of the Gospel Coalition. And this particular article from a certain religious leader basically want to expose and to sort of put it all together and say, hey, look at all these men from the Gospel Coalition who have fallen, and kind of made the common denominator their association with the Gospel Coalition, and saying, hey, this is a sign of God's disfavor toward the Gospel Coalition. And so he listed Mark Driscoll and Tullian Tchividjian and James MacDonald and C.J. Mahaney and then Josh Harris, and said, so, see, all these guys, all these big, powerful leaders were part of the Gospel Coalition, and they've all fallen. They've all had ministry failures, and they've been discredited or whatever. And then again, his angle was to say, here's what's wrong about their way of thinking, and here's what's wrong about the Gospel Coalition. But regardless of that, it does, at least for me, makes me think about our faith, and makes me think about the church, my experience in church, and concerns I have, or whatever. It's all kind of, here's what it is. It's all humans trying to make sense of what is happening when someone falls like that. We use that language. It's the usual kind of sitting and evaluating and trying to determine and make sense of it all. And one of the recurring themes that comes up is hypocrisy, as I mentioned last week. And so I want to read to you from this book, little longer section, about a page and a half, and maybe we'll see. I might just jump around a little bit, but this is just to kind of get our gears going. Our purpose every week, whether it's me or Don or someone else or David up front, our purpose in getting up here and trying to facilitate is to help us think about God, right? Not to focus on Josh Harris or me or you, but who our God is, and to be refreshed in the truth of who our God is and what he's done for us and what it means to have a relationship with him through Christ. That's why we're here. But this is a way to kind of, it's a touch point, right? This is a touch point for us. So let me read from this book, and the purpose of the book, called Unchristian, is to share what their surveys have revealed in terms of the common perceptions of outsiders, people outside the church, what they think of when they think of Christians, and especially in the category of like millennials, so young adults today. And so I'll read to you is what they say. One of the surprising insights from our research is that growing hostility toward Christians is very much a reflection of what outsiders feel they receive from believers. They say their aggression simply matches the oversized opinions and egos of Christians. One outsider put it this way: most people I meet assume that Christian means very conservative, entrenched in their thinking, anti-gay, anti-choice, angry, violent, illogical, empire builders. They want to convert everyone, and they generally cannot live peacefully with anyone who does not believe what they believe. So that was the reflection of one individual saying, wow, this seems to be what I hear and what I feel about Christians. I'm going to go a little farther. Why would present-day Christianity inspire such unfavorable reactions? Our studies explored the nature of the perceptions about Christianity, not just pro or con, but the substance of how people feel about Christians and Christianity. The central goal was not just to determine if people feel negatively, but why they do. What are we known for? That's the question the authors are asking. What are we known for? One crucial insight kept popping up in our exploration. In studying thousands of outsiders' impressions, it is clear that Christians are primarily perceived for what they stand against. We have become famous for what we oppose rather than what we are for. Think back to that outsider's comment mentioned earlier. What is her image of Christians? Entrenched thinking, anti-gay, anti-choice, angry, violent, illogical, empire-building, convert-focused people who cannot live peacefully with others. We are known for having an us versus them mentality. Outsiders believe Christians do not like them because of what they do, how they look, or what they believe. They feel minimized, or worse, demonized by those who love Jesus. And puts that kind of in quotes. And then he mentions the statistics I shared last week. Of the 1,000 surveyed, all these outsiders, the number one answer on the board, a la Family Feud, is anti-homosexual. 91% of young outsiders said anti-homosexual. Number two, judgmental, was 87%. And number three was hypocritical, 85%. As I said last week, those are not mutually exclusive. They're very closely related if you think about it carefully enough. So he goes through those statistics, and then he closes with this, and I'll just read this final section, and we'll talk about it a little bit. He says, yet not all reactions are negative. As part of our research, we found that many outsiders embrace favorable perceptions of present-day Christianity as well. They express conflicted attitudes about the faith, maintaining significant doubts, negative images, and concerns while experiencing positive associations as well. The most common favorable impression is that Christians teach the same basic ideas as other religions. And I think that means just sort of love your neighbor sort of thing. More than 4 out of every 5 young outsiders embrace this description. 3/4 believe that Christianity has, quote, good values and principles. And most outsiders indicate that present-day Christianity is, quote, friendly. Outsiders were split down the middle when it came to the following images: a faith they respect, a faith that shows love for others, something that offers hope for the future, and people they trust. Only a small percentage of outsiders strongly believe the labels respect, love, hope, and trust actually describe Christianity, however. A minority of outsiders perceives Christianity as genuine and real, as something that makes sense and as relevant to their lives. I'm going to read that last statement again. A minority of outsiders perceives Christianity as genuine and real, as something that makes sense and as relevant to their life. So I want to acknowledge as a footnote that this is a survey. These are people sitting in judgment over Christians, doing what people do. Okay, that's their judgment, their assessment. It's easy on one hand to just kind of dismiss all of it because of that, because of considering the source. But it is true that the Bible, New Testament, in fact, 1 Peter, I'm going to look at 1 Peter with you a little bit. If you have a Bible, you can open 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 2 talks about the view of outsiders, what they experience with Christians. God does address the topic. So I think it is something worth thinking about, processing. Where I tend to go, naturally speaking, with it is I think because I'm a church guy and this is my job and this has been my world for, gosh, a long time now, almost 2 decades of my life devoted to full-time ministry or, preparing for ministry, being in ministry. So this is my world, right? So I think about this a lot. And where I tend to go is I tend to think, well, how can we fix this? What do we do about this? And part of me says, well, we need to be more honest and we need more transparency in church. And that's been a theme at our church, and glad for that. And that's appropriate. And there's more to say, and there's deeper that we can go and deeper that we need to go with it. Because it really, once again, points us back to who God is, who He is. I mean, so far, all we've talked about is people. The big name Christian celebrity people I mentioned, some of you are familiar with. Ourselves, our perceptions. So far, I've only talked about people. There's a God, right? And like every other aspect of life, this is an opportunity to reflect on who He is and what He's like, and what is the fruit of how we understand what God is like. How does it play out in our lives, how we understand God? Well, there's a connection. And so I spent a little time recently in 1 Peter, and I just want to share some thoughts with you. And again, maybe we'll interact a little bit along the way. So 1 Peter 2, I'm going to read verses 11 and 12. And we'll start here. And then we're going to kind of work backwards, which is a little bit unusual, but this is the way my study went. So we're going to do it that way. I started with this passage that I've known for a long time. And it says this: Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. And where do you see in those verses the concept of outsiders and their perception of insiders? Where is that? We're the what? We're the aliens and strangers, right? And what term does Peter use regarding the outsiders? First, them as Gentiles, and technically not talking about their ethnicity, using that term to describe outsiders broadly, right? And he says, when they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So are they watching? Yeah, they're watching. God says that it's something for you to think about, that they are watching. But where did he begin the thought? In verse 11, he says, I urge you as aliens and strangers to do what? Abstain from fleshly lusts. So every example I gave earlier of all the megachurch pastors I mentioned, James MacDonald, C.J. Mahaney, Mark Driscoll, Tony Trevisan, Joshua Harris, every example, true or false, their fall, quote unquote, or their failure in ministry had something to do with lust. Can we agree on that? Okay. And he says here, I urge you as aliens and strangers, abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Does that not presuppose that as long as we're in this world, as aliens and strangers, we are going to have fleshly lust to contend with? We're all on the same page so far? It's true, right? And there's a category of fleshly lust, and Greg, I'm going to borrow your terminology. You talk about there's the unrighteous flesh and the self-righteous flesh. And there's the unrighteous lusts and the self-righteous lusts as well. And an interesting category for us to consider in the church is what God reveals in the parable of the prodigal son, where you have this good father who's generous. He's taking care of his boys, his two sons. He's built up an inheritance for them. And the one son, the prodigal, asks for his inheritance early. And what's he do? He goes out and squanders it. And he goes out, and it literally mentions he goes out partying and with prostitutes and all this debauchery, obvious sin, unrighteous flesh, unrighteous lusts. And what did the older son do? What did he do? Okay, we'll go there in a minute. But he stayed home, right? He stayed home, and he kept doing his job, working for his father, doing all the things that he was responsible to do there in the household. And he would seem like, by all appearances, to be the good one, the righteous one, the man of integrity. He didn't go out there and party and squander it and blow it all. He's working hard. Fast forward. Prodigal son comes home. Dad receives him. I mean, couldn't be more excited to receive and throws huge party and kills a fattened calf. And frankly, is kind of digging into, like, using some of the resources that were left over for the older brother now are being used to throw this party for this younger son who comes home. And what is the response of the older brother? Was he excited? Was he eager to join in the celebration? Would you say, Rose, what was the term used? He was resentful. I think you said, Gisela, jealous, right? He was jealous. So did he really have a heart that was filled with gratitude to belong to the Father, to be in the Father's household? Was he really enamored with the Father and the love of the Father, or did he want the stuff too? He wanted the stuff too. So if the first son represents the unrighteous flesh or unrighteous lust, the second represents the self-righteous flesh, the self-righteous lust. That's a category that I frankly didn't even have till a few years ago when that parable kind of hit me between the eyes. I just didn't think of it. I had a very superficial, moralistic way of viewing people's lifestyles, including my own. And I thought, okay, I had sort of my prodigal phase in my life, and then I went into more of a moral, upright way of life, and didn't realize that my flesh is still my flesh, and it comes along for the ride with me. And when we read about these scandals of people falling, we're just reading about flesh. It's the same thing that you have, that I have. It's these desires, it's these lusts. And Peter here says, there's this matter of an audience around you and this matter of lust within you. And he here pleads with them as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lust. And that word abstain is literally like identify it and hold it off, like see it in that way. I mean, if you can just picture it visually, it's like that with this presupposition that that's going to be part of life for us in this world, for us as fallen creatures. That's just, it's flesh, and it's just going to do what it does. Those desires, cravings. And he says this, and so here's where it gets us as we sort of work backwards to God, because the reality is, whether you're a religious person or irreligious person, you've been in the church your whole life, or you've only been in the church a short time, either way, these lusts wage war against your soul, and they're present and active. And sometimes you may be aware of it, and other times you are not. There's subtlety to it. When you look at even the examples that were given earlier of what were these examples of these men who fell, and the particulars of their fall was different. I mean, for some it was sexual immorality, infidelity, adultery. Others it was power. Mark Driscoll was accused of being, just exercising excessive power over his leadership and being manipulative. And for C.J. Mahaney, their church, they was rocked with sexual abuse scandals, and he was accused of covering that up and not coming clean. Why? Seemingly to protect the institution, to protect the establishment, to not let that crumble. So just, in the name of forgiveness and all that, let's just let it go and not let this threaten our organization. And there was differences and nuances to all that all ties down there and is connected to human desire, what people want. And these desires might, some of them even seem good. Keep the church growing, to keep the church going, to keep this, whatever. But God here is speaking truth about the condition that we are in, naturally speaking, and says that, look, there's lust, and you are aliens and strangers. And so what does that mean? So you back up, verses 9 and 10. This kind of explains what it means to be aliens and strangers. You're chosen, you're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, meaning you belong to God, you're for His own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into the marvelous light. Whose excellencies are we being invited to proclaim? God's excellencies. For you were once not a people, but now you are the people of God, and you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. God's had mercy on you. You belong to Him. He found you. And it made me think of Exodus and what we've been seeing as we move along, that here's the Israelites, and they're stuck in Egypt, and they're complaining, and they're struggling, and you have above them a God who's, and you encounter all these descriptions. God saw them, and God heard their groans. He knew them in their suffering. He knew their affliction. And God spoke. It says God spoke several times. And then everything we just finished in the Ten Commandments, God speaking to his people. Here's a God who is in relentless pursuit of his people who are enslaved. Back then, the slavery was very obvious, external. There was internal slavery too, but the most obvious was the external. From beginning to end in human history, the real slavery that afflicts us is the internal, it's this lust thing. And God sees that and he has mercy. He has mercy for us. And he says we belong to him. And then we back up a little farther. It says that, to summarize, verse 4 and following talks about Jesus and how he is the choice stone. He's the foundation stone. And the one who believes in him will not be disappointed. This is the precious value, is Christ and who he is and what it means that God has rescued you through him. And then he says in verse 8 that is the stone of stumbling and rock of offense. They stumble because they are disobedient to the word, and to this doom they were appointed. He's talking again about those outsiders, and here's what he's saying. You know what the only difference between them and you, between the outsiders surveyed and the insiders part of the church, you know what the difference is? The difference is, by a miracle, we've been persuaded of the word of the gospel, and they have not yet been persuaded. It says they've not been persuaded. When it says they are disobedient to the word literally is they're unpersuaded by the word. Unpersuaded by the greatness of Jesus. Unpersuaded by the fact that their lust is waging war against their souls and killing them, and the only rescue is in a relationship with their Creator to be rescued by him. Not persuaded of that. And by his grace in our lives, he's opened our eyes to see that that's what's true. That's his nature. He's a rescuing God. He's a loving God. He's a redeeming God. He sees us in that misery and he comes for us to save us. And you back up a little further and he says, he's already talked about gospel in chapter 1. In fact, he used the word mercy. Lots of different terms, grace, peace, mercy. I mean, all this about what God has done, You are a holy nation. God's made that a reality for you. All this, he builds and builds and builds all these great ways of explaining what God's done. And then here in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, therefore, putting aside malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, slander, like newborn babies, long for the pure milk of the word, so that by it you may grow in respect to salvation, if you have tasted the kindness of the Lord. So what are we to do when these stories hit the news? They've happened. They will continue to happen. Where do you go? I mean, where do we look? What's the help? Is the help looking within? Is it saying, well, boy, what am I like? Am I going to fall? Is this going to happen? I mean, is help and hope come from there? Or does God invite us to look to him? And he says, return to the pure milk of the word. And if you've tasted the kindness of the Lord, this is who, the only hope for humanity, the only hope for me, for you is God. Is a God who exists outside of us, a God who is personal. I mean, to think that our suffering really in its origin stems from our rejection of God, and yet that same God cares about our suffering and makes it his mission to rescue us and subjects himself to immense suffering to win us, to get us back. The picture of the father in the prodigal son story who, I mean, you'd think in one sense as a parent, there's a lot of parents in here, and we were joking earlier about, we like to serve our kids and there's some pleasure in it, and that's really like limited. Doesn't take long before the ingratitude and the whatever else that goes on, it just starts to grate on you, and you know what happens, right? Yeah, exactly. So to think that we are those kids, we are those ingrates, those little greedy ingrates, all 7.7 billion of us in the world, and there's a father above, and when a son sees his disgusting sin and filth and emptiness and shame like the prodigal did when he ended up in the pigsty. You just see this is terrible. And you just start to say, if I could just go, if I could just get back, if he'll just take me as a slave. And the father sees him from a long way away, and what's he do? He hikes up his garment, which in those days was kind of like a humbling thing to do. I guess it still would be a humbling thing to do for most of us at any rate. And he just bolts, runs to the son and embraces him and kisses him and brings him home and says, "You're with your dad. I love you. I've never left you. You left me and you went this way, but I never left you. I kept watching and waiting for you to come home." And so this is why it's so important to know that the whole point of us being a church is a little church here, or if you think about yourself in the context of the larger universal church, like it's not about us. Like it's not, except for the fact that we're rescued people. That God's done a miracle and given us glimmers and opening our eyes more and more to who He is, the value of who He is, which left to ourselves we would never see, we would never pick. And it's interesting when it says in verse 12, back to where we started, because of your good deeds, they observe them and glorify God, day of visitation. So I told this embarrassing story this morning. Why not tell it again with all of you here? Oh, absolutely. I will indulge you. We sang this song in college. Jill, sing with me again. Make me a servant, humble and meek. And so that was a very small portion of the song. You get the idea. And I remember going out of public school, go to Christian college, and superficially looked so much different. And we had chapel, and we had Bible classes, and singing songs like that during chapel services. And I would look and see these leaders on campus, these men and women who would hold doors for people and help pick up each other's trays after dinner and so on, and said, well, that's what you do to be a servant. And so I'm going to become a servant. And that's easy it's easy to hold a door for somebody. Stinking easy. Easy to walk an old lady across the street. You usually hear that example. You walk across the street. How much? Easy. Not easy when it costs you. Not easy when that other person and serving them collides with your desire for what you want. Whether that be respect, a little gratitude, payback, financially, whatever it is, then you run into really quickly the end of yourself. And so last week when we preached the commandment keeper, why do we even talk about that? I'm not like trying to beat us down. Like you're all great people. I'm thankful that we're here. But like, I'm just trying to, this is what God says is true of our condition. And for us to see Him and appreciate Him, like part of that, as He describes the truth, is Him saying, hey, this is what's true of you too. And I love you. And I'm coming for you. And so to know that there is a Jesus who is a commandment keeper, there is a Christ who is a hope for love, that there is fruitfulness in our lives, there is great fruitfulness in serving our kids or other people or whatever. I mean, there is. God is it, and it is because God is, and because God is alive, and because God is active, and because God is working, and He hasn't left us to ourselves. And so even the good deeds term, it's interesting when you look at it, it's the same word good that's used in Genesis when it says God created the sun and the moon and the stars, and He said they were good. And He created the animals and the fish and the whales and the sea, and He said they're good. And He created the plant life and the trees, and it's good. And we were just at Mount Rainier recently and observing the beauty, and God says, good, it's 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 good. And whatever these deeds are, they're born out of that explosion that takes place when a redeeming God who's given us His Spirit opens our eyes to see His goodness poured out. I find myself being a very ungrateful person a lot of the time. And I don't even understand it. There's times I say, what is wrong? Like I'm talking to myself, dude, what is wrong with you? What do you want that you don't have? But this lust thing, I mean, there's no end to it. I want everything. I want everything I have and everything all of you have too. I want Jack's jet ski really bad. Yeah. It's your opportunity to serve me. And we had a conversation recently, and we were just talking about, look, like these things, even when God says, look, like the difference is, so you see who God is, and you get glimmers of it, and you want more of it, and you know you need Him to give you more, and you're aware of your lusts. And contextually here, like God's saying, look, when it even comes to that, like I know that's the best you got. You're the Israelites enslaved the Egyptians, just working, and they can't do a dang thing to rescue themselves. They got nothing. They have no weapons. They're exhausted. They have nothing. And this is the strongest military there is. And they're gonna free themselves? Are you kidding me? So I'll close with this. When we hear these stories and we have a desire for there to be fruit in our lives that the people can see and that they can see and be drawn to Christ, like, I'll just leave you with this. God says it's true that we all have these lusts that wage war against our souls. We all have them. And you still have them. And some of them you're aware of and some of them you're not. And you won't be aware of until God threatens it or takes it away. Then you'll realize. And when the stories come out and you say, okay, that's human nature and that's what I would be, left to myself to use a platform, a ministry platform for selfish gain, yeah, it's what humans do. My prayer, I guess, for all of us is that there be a growing awareness of the reality of those selfish lusts that are destructive to us. There be awareness of them and an awareness along with that of what they do, how they wage war against the soul. And when someone's soul is in the middle of a war, that person's not fun to be around. And that's what it does. And we have a God who sees that and sees that at root it's us ignoring Him, minimizing Him, dismissing Him, and for our good comes for us anyway, and showers us with the word Peter uses at least 3 times that we've looked at this morning: mercy. He has mercy for you. Wherever you're at, wherever you're stuck, mercy, 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 mercy. His goodness extended to you in your suffering, in your sin. And so there's lots of topics, and when, as people who believe in Scripture and have, that's going to feed into our political views and other things and how we understand topics like even the homosexuality topic, things like that. We have beliefs about what God says is true and right and how He designed things to be. And if we're going to think according to truth and live according to truth, then we agree with God on those points. And there's always going to be accusations and slander, and it's just the way it's always going to be. If there's anything for us to take to heart, it's this same focus in what we've considered about our own lusts and God's mercy toward us. And the spillover of that, I believe, is having tasted of the goodness of God, having tasted and seen that God is good, then there is a spillover of good deeds and fruitfulness. And others may even be impacted by that. And we see people say, you know what, that's what I need Jesus to. I need my Creator. I need redemption. I need forgiveness. I need to come clean with my hypocrisy. As I said last week, hypocrisy is like an equal opportunity experience. Everyone's guilty of it. And God just offers us covering and mercy.